Okay, we're going to go over a few basic techniques for fabric and a little bit of vocabulary just to get you started. So in patterns, you will frequently read the words the right side and wrong side. Now, we don't want our seams to show on the outside of our projects unless that's an intentional design choice. So we will almost always sew with right sides together. And the right side is the patterned side of your fabric if it's printed. So a cotton like this, you can see clearly the difference between the right side and the wrong side. There may be some fabrics that have a very subtle difference between their right side and wrong side. And there may also be fabrics that actually don't have a right or wrong side that are actually the same. So there are some considerations with that you have to pay attention to, but for right now we're going to assume that the right and the wrong side of your fabric is obvious. Now, when you're sewing, you need to be able to hold pieces together. So I'm going to use this little bodice as an example. And if we have these pieces and we need to sew the back together, I would put right sides together, which means that the right side is going to be touching the right side, and I would match up this seam. Let's say I'm going to sew this back seam right here. So I'm going to line that up nicely. You can see that I am looking at the wrong side, and the wrong side is also on the back. On the inside, my right sides are together. Now for pinning, there are a few important things to remember when we are pinning our fabric. Pinning our fabric is one of the most important things you can do to keep your fabric in line and keep it from shifting. As you sew, the presser foot and the feed dogs can actually create up to ½ an inch of difference just by the different pressures that they create, because the bottom of the presser foot is smooth while the feed dogs really grip the fabric. So it can really shift your fabric as you sew, and then you end up with, you know, maybe a ½ inch of difference at the bottom that you shouldn't have. So we want to pin to keep our fabric nice and still and to keep it from shifting. So when we place a pin in fabric, we have our raw edges lined up exactly how we want them, and then we're just going to simply push the pin in through both layers and then back up again. You can leave the pin head sticking off of the fabric. In fact, it should be. Unless you have something very specific, you're not going to be sticking a pin like in the middle of your fabric. And you don't really want your pin right here on the outside edge either, because the closer that this that the pin is exposed, the closer that is to where your seam allowance actually is, the better it's going to keep your fabric from shifting. So you don't want to teeter a little pin up there. The head will lay here. When you sew, you'll take your pins out before you stitch over them, and that's the same for serging. And you can space your pins a few inches apart. Depending on how slippery the fabric is, you may or may not need to space them closer or further apart, but that's up to you. They really don't need to be too close. Like pinning every inch down the edge of a piece of your project would take forever, and it's really not necessary. So 4 or 5 inches down, and you can simply stick the pin in like that, and you can see on this other side that the pin is keeping both pieces of fabric in place. You want to use sharp pins. You'll notice if you come across a dull pin that it will not stick through your fabric, and you'll have to really like poke a hole in there. That can damage your fabric, especially lighter weight ones, so you want to definitely use sharp pins. The last note is that you can see that my pins are perpendicular to the edge of my fabric. We do not, you may see it sometimes, but we do not want to pin this way, because as we sew down this seam, pinning this direction does not help with the sliding of our fabrics, because our fabric can still slide along here. This keeps it in place, this does not. Okay, so always pin perpendicular. Now, you can see right here that I have some clips actually that look like this, and clips can be really handy and they serve a similar purpose to pins. There are some instances when you actually need pins, like if you are cutting out a new pattern and you have it laid out on some fabric, you really need pins to keep that in place. But when you're sewing, I find that clips can be really handy. We have some of these in the lab that you can use, especially for fabrics that are either very heavy, very light, or that have special coatings on them. So a lot of you in the outdoor product design major will be working with specialty fabrics. So this here is a fabric that actually has a waterproof coating on the inside. So this would be like a rain jacket material or something like that. So it's got this coating inside that's basically a film. And if you keep sticking pins in here, you're going to poke holes in it. And if you're trying to make something that's waterproof, you don't want to be poking any more holes than you have to be in your fabric. So that would be a really good time to use clips. And you use them in a similar way as pins. And they usually have a flat side, which you want to be on the side that's going to be on the bottom when you're sewing. So you're just simply going to slide those on, and again, you can space them, especially on a simple cotton like this, you could space them 4 to 5 inches apart. And that's nice because they lay flat that way. If you do it the other way, then it won't lay flat. Your fabric's going to bubble and it could cause some issues. So that is some information for you about pins, clips, and the right and wrong sides of your fabric.